Welcome to the MacGregor Gallery at DTUC. The show we're going to look at today is a replacement for the regular scheduled ceramic show which was not available. This exhibition is called the Federation of Canadian Artists Interior Group, Kamloops. There are a number of federations of Canadian artists in each province. There are about 6 in BC, and this is the one in the area of Kamloops. And there are about 30 artists represented in this group of paintings. The first painting, titled Thompson River, is by Fred Doubt. Fred was born and educated in Trail. And he represents, I guess, one of the many artists who have taken some art school training and have continued to paint. Fred does teach a number of adult classes at Caribou College, and he works mainly in oils. Most of these artists are amateur artists. There's a few professionals, and there are a number of laymen who have just recently got into the Art Act. But the whole idea of the Federation of Artists was to bring divergent groups of people interested in the arts so they could compare ideas, get together to paint, and to set up exhibitions. This exhibition happens to be a juried show. If we could go on to the next work. The title is Untouched, and this is a watercolor. Most of these tend to be regional scenes. They probably represent and are characteristic of the artists that form the Federation. Some of them are professionals, many of them are teachers, and many of them are amateurs or Sunday painters. And there's a love of nature and a love of the act of painting evident in most of the works. With this kind of a group, it forms a very divergent show in that some of the works you can sense the battles the artist has had trying to deal with nature in terms of the medium. In others, a little more sophistication is obvious. It shows some of their academic or art school training, while others may be the results of artists whose profession is in the commercial art. This work, titled Time at Creek, is an oil by Maureen Lipkewich. I think we'll have to zoom in a little on the camera with this because it's a very small work, but it has some very tiny figures in there that are quite charming. This artist, Maureen Lipkewich, she's born in Toronto, and she'd moved to Kamloops recently, well, about 3 years ago, and there she began painting. She's largely self-taught, but she's developed considerable skill, and she teaches adult and children's classes. From that, we can move to a watercolor called Path to the Hills. This work is by Dorothy Wright, who was born in Summerland and raised in the Kootenays. She works in watercolor, pen and ink, and pastel, and she shows regularly with the group at Kamloops, the Arts and Crafts Club, the Public Art Gallery there, and the Federation. And she I guess gives a good example of the regional kind of artist who's very intrigued with the local scenery, and usually their media is in watercolor. From there we'll move to a larger work. This work, also a watercolor, is on a much grander scale, titled Two Geese, and the title is obvious. This is by Dora Richmond. Dora Richmond is from Alberta. Most of these artists seem to come from elsewhere and have settled in the Kootenays or in the Okanagan. She conducts classes at Kamloops for the Parks and Recreation Department, and she sells considerable of her work through galleries in both Alberta and in Kamloops. From there, we'll go and focus in on a different media. This one is a pencil study. It's untitled, but the artist is student Eridix. She was born in Hungary, but has since become a Canadian citizen, and she was educated and took much of her art training at Caribou College in Kamloops. And since '81, she's had considerable experience with art and in exhibiting with groups in the Okanagan, in Vancouver, and in the Lower Mainland. The next work, titled Lauren Peak No. 3, is rather reminiscent of some of the Group of Seven, and certainly Lauren Harris. This is an oil by Daryl Clayton. Daryl's an elementary school teacher in Kamloops and a great lover of the outdoors. He paints on location, and he's taken part in many of the group shows. Also showed with the BC Festival of the Arts. And from there, we'll swing around to the other side of the gallery. The title here is Rising Waters. It's a watercolor by Wynn Hagerson. I think a close-up probably shows it to advantage in the subtle technique of leaf forms and the background. Watercolor, a very demanding medium, and I think this show shows varying degrees of competency with it. As an artist becomes more involved with it, he adapts a more carefree attitude because it's a very spontaneous medium. And you have a sort of mixture here of a very hard, defined color area, whereas the tree itself really springs to life. An untitled work, but I guess it scarcely needs a title. It's a watercolor by H.M. Peverley, a Kamloops artist who operates a shop in Kamloops. It's called the Valley View Art Shop, and he also has a studio area in the back where he works. I guess this is probably one of the characteristic kinds of works one usually finds in a regional group among artists who express a love of objects and things, especially old houses, old barns, things with a charm to them, and they deal more with the problems of trying to emulate or interpret the superficial or even the outer characteristics of objects rather than dealing with the content. Another characteristic subject, as we move to the next work, is that of flowers. Flowers offer such a range of color that they can be quite an exciting thing for both amateur and professional to deal with. This one, called Cactus Flower Oil by Olga Burr, who is also a Kamloops artist and shares in their group shows. Flowers are her forte. But in a gallery like this, those colors really gleam, really come alive. From there, we'll move to another work, a little different in that the artist, Doug Strand, who's from Creston, lived in the Kootenays most of his life, although he studied at OCA, the Ontario College of Art. He spent 4 years in an advertising illustration course, and I think as we get in close to this work, we can see the technical skill is quite evident with someone who spent some time studying the media and ways of expressing a variety of things. It's called Long Beach, and it's a watercolor. It catches the mood of a gray day, waves, and even the movement of a bird in flight. I mentioned that some of these were artists here were professionals. Some were professional and teachers. Some were amateurs, and some were laymen who were just beginning, while a number are involved in commercial art. Doug now operates his own graphic design studio in Kamloops, but continues as an active fine artist on his free time. From that work, we go to a more larger type. This is one of the larger works in the exhibition, about 4 by 4. It's called Magyar Sonata, an acrylic by Susan Eridix. Susan was born in Hungary and now has Canadian citizenship, educated in Caribou College, and the work shows a little more sophistication with composition and design, much freer use of color, more familiarity with it. The title refers to her country of origin, I guess, because it's two women speaking. And they tell me that two Hungarian women in close conversation sound very musical. The very bold patterning of the garments suggests the folk art of Hungary, and the very simplified forms and shapes suggest her familiarity with the art media. Most of these works tend to deal directly with nature and the problems that are inherent. But a few of these artists that are more familiar with the various disciplines in art begin to experiment, and this is one of the larger ones. Going from that to another smaller work that deals more directly with nature is one called Snow Patterns. It's an acrylic by Alice Duck, born in Vancouver. Attended the Vancouver School of Art, moved to Kamloops, where she has worked with the art group there and shows regularly with their exhibitions, and is an active member of the Federation. The work, while small and directly related to nature, shows considerable skill in brushwork and in the handling of small forms. If you can get in fairly close there, it's rather fascinating the way she has managed to suggest the intertwining of brushes with very fine, organic kinds of brushstrokes. And from that, we go to another experimental piece. This one happens to be a print, an embossed print, and it shows considerable knowledge of the embossing methodology, and is quite experimental. We may have to pan in rather close on this, because this one, being embossed, is dependent on the shadows, or light and dark, because it's white paper that has been depressed over collage forms, and this gives it a kind of high relief. The title, Accord, November 1981, obviously has social comment significance. The groups of maple leaves at the one side, I guess one can derive their own thoughts on what this means, a kind of solidarity one hopes for, has happened, but primarily amongst the English-speaking Canada, while the other section shows a tight wired fence which encloses one lone fleur-de-lis. Kind of subtle comment on the situation in a pluralistic society as we have in Canada. This is by Susan Gamble. Another member of the Federation who exhibits regularly with them. This artist, Susan Gamble, probably has more experience and more background than many of the others, and her biography is rather interesting to review. She was born in northern Michigan, educated in northern Ontario at Kirkland, that's a gold mining town in the north, and later at the University of Toronto and the University of Ottawa. She attained a BA degree from the University of Ottawa with a concentration in fine arts in 1971. She continued studies toward a Bachelor of Science in Geology at the University of Ottawa and the Laurentian University in Sudbury. She's employed full-time as a survey technician in Kirkland Lake, Ontario, and also maintains a studio, or had maintained a studio there with two other Northern Ontario artists. So she's been a successful prospector in Northern Ontario and a member of the Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada. She took up printmaking in the town of Kirkland, bought herself a Praga etching press, and started out with some success by winning the prize for the logo for the town of Kirkland's 60th anniversary. And just recently moving to Kamloops, she now maintains a home studio there and spends practically all her time painting and printmaking. She's also interested in things like weaving, horses, skiing, and she's a member of the Print and Drawing Council of Canada. So of course to her printmaking she brings all this multiple background, which might explain the divergent quality of her work as compared to the others. From there, we'll move to another painting, an oil titled North Wind Sculpture by Al Wentz, who lives in Winfield. That's pretty close to home here. And he paints all the seasonal changes of the countryside around the area where he lives. He has a small gallery in Winfield for those who are motoring around the province, and his paintings are to be found in many homes in BC. If we can get in close to this, it shows a very competent use of the brush and color, some very fine work there. And an interesting contrast between the form that obviously suggested the title, a group of grasses that suggest the motion of the wind frozen into a moving posture, silhouetted against that running water. This work, titled Flowers, is a watercolor by Betty Holinick, who was born in Cranbrook and attended school in the Kootenays. She's known primarily as a worker in porcelain and a teacher. She teaches porcelain art in Revelstoke, and she's had work in a number of international porcelain shows. But recently she began to develop an interest in watercolors. So she took a number of seminars and courses here at the David Thompson University Center. And her concerns with watercolor, of course, are realism. And like many of the amateur painters, she has a great love for flowers. But here she displays considerable skill and technical virtuosity in the handling of the flowers. If we can get in close, you can see some lovely fresh passages of watercolor treatment that really make those petals and leaves come to life. A very colorful piece, a very well composed piece. From there, we'll go to another work, which is a pencil drawing by Faye, a resident of Barrier, who spends her days depicting the life of the cowboy and Western themes in both her painting and drawing. She also teaches painting there and is quite active in their artistic community, and has recently had a one-person show at the Kamloops Public Art Gallery. This is a very small work, so if we can get in close enough, you can see the fresh, crisp pencil technique that brings the figure literally to life. A very neat little work by Alice Duck, an artist who we've already seen some of her work. It's titled Beside the Tracks, done in acrylic, and it's very skillfully rendered. Just a little clump of grasses and the snow with shadows and an indication of the wind. She had studied the Vancouver School of Art, and it certainly indicates a facility with a brush. The grasses really come to life with her brushstroke. It really seems to be very innovative and spontaneous. Moving from there to the next work, another artist we've seen before, Doug Strand. This is the artist who studied illustration in the Ontario College of Art, and this work, a watercolor, shows his expertise with that media. With such a few strokes, he's able to render masses of grass, suggest shingles, and give very interesting form to clouds and trees. He suggests all the detail with a minimum of effort. He also includes in it some drawing done both with the brush and with pencil. And again, this is one of the subjects that's dear to the heart of both amateur and commercial artists. Swinging around from there to a rather large work, large for watercolor, is one titled Miner's Cabin. This is by Von Butland. Artists seem to have a love for the old, the antique buildings, and maybe it's only due to them that we're going to have a record of many of the early buildings and examples of architecture that are fast disappearing in British Columbia. Rather sophisticated composition and his use of large white spaces to contrast against the movement of hills and the interlocking cabin which is falling apart. Vaughn came originally from the eastern coast of Canada, but he's been in Kamloops for about 11 years. He's had a number of solo shows and also sells a great deal of his work in commercial galleries, both in BC and in Alberta. And his favorite scenes, of course, are the local landscape, old buildings, and rolling countryside of Kamloops. From there, we'll go to another regional kind of scene, also watercolor, titled Snowy Birches by Pat Anderson of Revelstoke. She's attended many workshops in the Central Washington University to study art, and a number of courses in the Okanagan. And she concentrates on detail and enjoys the realistic approach to scenery. a little different season, and of course that becomes obvious. We look at the title, Seasons Change. From winter, we're getting into summer and autumn. This is by Nora Burkhout. It's an oil. Nora is a Kamloops artist, and she's a graduate of the Fine Arts degree course at Caribou. She's involved with a number of group shows in Kamloops. She paints in both watercolor and oil, and shows some skill and knowledge of the medium of oil in the intermix of forms and colors, and the very bravado type of sky that she deals with, which gives an interesting composition. If you can zoom in there on the sky, and then from there we'll move to the next work. This one's a watercolor by Maureen Zayas of Oyama, BC. Born and educated in Germany, where she received her first exposure to the arts, especially the visual arts. She came to Canada in '52, settled in Calgary, and studied watercolors at SAIT. She's won a number of awards for outdoor painting, and she's exhibited throughout the Okanagan with a number of artists. But she set up her studio in Oyama, BC, where she enjoys the beauty of the surrounding countryside, bordering the wood and Kalamalka Lake. And she's recorded one of our early pieces of architecture, a fine old home, with all its intricate gingerbread. And she's developed considerable skill with the watercolor media, suggesting forms rather than overworking them. Untitled is the title of this work by Jeanette Noble-Smith, who lives in Prince George, where she paints full-time. She has a fine art degree from Winnipeg and has taught high school art in the Dawson Creek area. Her work has been in many commercial galleries in BC and all through Vancouver and Kamloops, and she's had solo and group shows throughout Western Canada. She also had a painting selected to be part of the BC Festival of the Arts in Kamloops. This is one work, I think, in which we not only can enjoy the landscape, but we can begin to share the artist's viewpoint. Many of the works, we admire them as competent renderings of what that person saw. But here's a work by an artist who adds something of herself in it. It may not be completely the vision we see, but it suggests something about her, the combination of colors she uses, the kinds of rhythm that she has got into the painting through the trees, the fence, the other kinds of forms, and possibly her judicious choice of shapes, sizes, and movement. It's quite a live kind of work. And I think if we saw a number of works like this, we'd begin to feel, that there was something there that was part of that artist that made her different from others. It's a rather interesting contrast, having seen so many divergent points of view today, so many attitudes, and it has much to do with one's familiarity with art and with the media. From that piece, we'll move over to the final work. It's called Sunbather. It's a watercolor by Marie Scott, a Kamloops artist who has a rather unique style that may be her own as well, as much as the other one suggested the character of that artist. She studied at the Banff School of Fine Art and has recently had a one-man or one-woman show at the Kamloops Public Art Gallery and had her work included in the Okanagan 1982 Juried show. But you know, in her scene, she simplifies and breaks down all her shapes into simple planes and forms that have a certain rhythm to them. And because of the way she's adjusted the shapes, it makes her work quite different from the others. She's still instilled a mood into it. And of course, this is in the medium of watercolor, a very demanding medium that has to be spontaneous and decided on with a kind of immediacy. So with this last work, that wraps up a review of this show, the Federation of Canadian Artists. And we owe a debt of thanks to the Kamloops Art Gallery that was able to send us this show to replace the ceramic show that was unavailable. The next show coming up is the Alf Crossley exhibition. Alf is a painter, and that show will be on from August the 16th to August the 27th. I'd like to thank my assistant, Shelley Zubak, camera woman, and of course the production manager, Mike McMahon. Thank you very much.